There is a moment you know very well. You promise yourself you will change. You tell yourself that tomorrow will be different, that this time you will be more patient, more disciplined, more mindful. And for a short while, you believe it, but then the same pattern returns. You delay what you know you should do. You react when you meant to stay silent. You fall back into habits you had sworn you were done with. And afterward, there is a quiet confusion inside you. Why did I do that again? Why do I know what is right, yet struggle to live by it? Most people assume the enemy is outside. They blame the world, the pressure, other people, temptation, even the devil. They say, if my circumstances were better, I would be better. But life slowly teaches you something unsettling. Even when the world is calm, the struggle remains. You can be alone in a quiet room with no one provoking you, no difficulty pressing in from the outside, and still feel restlessness inside. Your mind wanders during prayer. Your heart tightens when someone else succeeds. Your patience thins over the smallest inconvenience. Nothing external caused it, yet something moved within you. This is where the Sufis ask you to stop looking outward and begin looking inward, because the most persistent force shaping your choices does not live in the world. It lives within you, not as something dramatic, not as a voice shouting commands, but as a subtle pull toward comfort, toward ego, toward reaction, toward ease instead of truth. In everyday life, this force appears harmless. It says, rest a little longer. Speak now, you deserve to be heard. Just this once won't matter. And because it sounds familiar, because it sounds like you, it is rarely questioned. You feel it when you postpone something important without a clear reason. You feel it when irritation rises faster than wisdom. You feel it when your heart resists humility, even while your tongue speaks politely. This is not imagination. It is not weakness unique to you. Islamic spirituality gives this inner force a name, the Nafs, not as a concept meant to shame you, but as a reality meant to be understood. The Nafs is the part of you that pulls toward impulse instead of awareness. It is the tendency that seeks immediate relief rather than long-term clarity. It is not evil in the theatrical sense, but when left unchecked, it quietly governs your decisions. Ibn Arabi taught that most human suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from how the Nafs responds to what happens. Two people can face the same event. One grows, the other hardens. One becomes patient, the other bitter. The difference is not fate, it is mastery. And this is why the struggle with the Nafs was called the greatest struggle, not because it is violent or dramatic, but because it is constant. It unfolds in silence, inside ordinary moments, in choices no one else sees. The question is not whether you have a Nafs. Every human does. The real question is this: are you aware when it is leading you? Or do you only notice after it has already decided for you? Because once you begin to recognize this inner force honestly, a different kind of journey begins. One that does not require escaping the world, but seeing yourself more clearly within it. And if the enemy you have been fighting all along lives inside you, how do you face it without becoming lost in the struggle itself? When people first hear about the Nafs, they often misunderstand it. They imagine it as the body's desires, or as something crude and animalistic that must be crushed. Some even believe that spirituality means escaping the body altogether. But Ibn Arabi did not see it this way. He taught that the Nafs is not your body, and it is not desire itself. Hunger, rest, attraction, and emotion are part of being human. They are not the enemy. The Nafs, in Ibn Arabi's language, is something more subtle and more dangerous. It is the veil through which you see yourself and the world. A veil does not destroy what is behind it. It only distorts it. This is why two people can experience the same desire, the same anger, the same fear, and one remains grounded while the other is carried away. The difference is not the feeling itself, but the lens through which it is perceived. In everyday life, you see this clearly. You feel anger rise, and immediately the nafs interprets it. You are being disrespected. You feel desire, and the nafs whispers, you deserve this now. You feel discomfort, and the nafs insists, something is wrong. Escape this feeling. The nafs does not create these sensations. It narrates them. Ibn Arabi explained that the nafs strengthens when a person lives unconsciously, reacting rather than witnessing, justifying rather than observing. This is why blind self-control often fails. The more someone tries to overpower their impulses through force alone, the more tension builds inside. You may have noticed this in your own life. The more you tell yourself, I must stop thinking this way, the louder the thought becomes. The more you suppress an emotion without understanding it, the more it returns in another form. This is not because the nafs is powerful. It is because it thrives in darkness. Ibn Arabi taught that awareness is not passive. Awareness is light, and light weakens the nafs not by attacking it, but by revealing it. When something is seen clearly, it loses its ability to deceive. This is why he emphasized presence over struggle, presence during action, presence during emotion, presence during worship. When you eat without awareness, the nafs leads. When you speak without awareness, the nafs leads. When you worship without awareness, even then, the nafs can quietly take control, turning prayer into habit and devotion into self-image. This is a difficult truth, but a liberating one, because it means that controlling the nafs is not about becoming harsh with yourself. It is about becoming honest. The nafs, Ibn Arabi said, is not defeated by punishment, but by insight. The moment you see how it twists perception, how it exaggerates fears, inflates ego, and demands urgency, you are no longer completely under its command. In this way, the nafs is not only an obstacle, it is also a teacher. Every time it pulls you toward reaction, it reveals where awareness is missing. Every time it demands control, it shows where trust has not yet settled in the heart. And this is why Ibn Arabi warned against hating the nafs. Hatred only deepens the veil. What is rejected remains unconscious. What is observed begins to transform. So the struggle is not against your body. It is not against life. It is against the unseen filter that quietly shapes your choices without your permission. And once you begin to sense this veil, once you notice how quickly the nafs interprets, defends, and demands, you start to understand why self-knowledge was considered the doorway to knowing God. But if the nafs is a veil rather than a monster, then the next question becomes unavoidable. How does it hide so easily inside ordinary life without you even realizing it is there? The nafs does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a clear warning or a dramatic urge. Most of the time, it enters quietly, blending into your thoughts until you can no longer tell where you end and it begins. This is why it is so effective. In ordinary life, the nafs hides behind reasonable explanations. It speaks in a tone that sounds logical, protective, even responsible. It rarely says, do something wrong. Instead, it says, this is necessary, or you have a right to feel this way. You see it during the smallest moments. A conversation does not go as you hoped, and something tightens inside you. Before awareness can settle, the nafs reacts. correct them, defend yourself. Don't let this pass. By the time you notice what happened, the words are already spoken. Later, in quiet reflection, you may think, I could have handled that differently. But at the moment itself, something else was driving. Ibn Arabi described this as the Nafs wearing the mask of intelligence. It borrows your knowledge, your experiences, even your religious understanding, and uses them to justify reaction. This is why the Nafs can survive even in spiritual environments. It adapts. You may recognize it when you compare yourself to others, not openly, not maliciously, but silently. Someone else is praised, and the Nafs whispers, you deserve that. Someone else succeeds, and it murmurs, if only they knew how flawed that person really is. Nothing is spoken, yet something has already shifted inside. The Nafs is especially subtle in moments of exhaustion, when you are tired, hungry, overstimulated, or emotionally drained. Awareness weakens and the Nafs steps forward. It pushes toward comfort without wisdom. It urges distraction instead of presence. It seeks relief, not truth. Even spiritual practices are not immune. You sit for prayer, but the mind rushes ahead. The body performs the motions, yet the heart remains unsettled. When the prayer ends, the Nafs quietly evaluates, you prayed well today. Or worse, others don't pray like you. Here, the Nafs does not oppose worship. It uses it. Ibn Arabi warned that this is one of its most dangerous forms. When the Nafs wraps itself in goodness, it becomes harder to detect. Pride can hide inside humility. Attachment can hide inside devotion. Control can hide inside discipline. This is why self-honesty is so rare and so precious. Ask yourself gently, when you feel offended, what is really being protected? When you insist on being right, what feels threatened? When you rush toward comfort, what are you trying not to feel? These questions are not meant to accuse you. They are meant to reveal the quiet mechanics of the Nafs at work. The Nafs thrives on speed. It needs quick reactions. It needs you to move before awareness arrives. And this is why ordinary life is its favorite territory. Not in dramatic sins, but in daily choices. Not in loud disobedience, but in subtle self-justification. Once you see this, something changes. You begin to notice the gap, small at first, between impulse and action. You sense the moment where a choice is still open, where silence is possible, where patience can intervene. This gap is where the struggle truly lives. But to recognize the Nafs clearly, you must be careful. Because if recognition turns into self-contempt, the Nafs simply takes another shape. So, the next step is not aggression, it is understanding. How do you recognize the Nafs honestly without turning against yourself in the process? When people begin to notice the Nafs at work within themselves, a new danger often appears. The danger is not desire or impulse, but harshness. Many turn against themselves the moment awareness dawns. They judge every thought, condemn every emotion, and treat inner struggle as proof of failure. But Ibn Arabi cautioned against this deeply. He taught that the Nafs is not healed through hostility. Hatred only gives it another place to hide. When you attack the Nafs blindly, it simply changes its voice, becoming self-loathing, despair, or spiritual pride disguised as discipline. Recognition must be paired with mercy. In everyday life, you already understand this principle. Think of a powerful animal that has never been guided. If you beat it, it becomes fearful or violent. If you ignore it, it runs wild. But if you train it patiently, with consistency and firmness, it begins to respond. The Nafs is similar. It is strong, it is persistent, but it is not unreasonable. Ibn Arabi emphasized that the nafs does not need to be destroyed because it cannot be destroyed. As long as you are alive, it will exist. The goal is not elimination, but discipline through awareness. This is why the first act of control is simply noticing without immediately obeying and without immediately condemning. You feel anger rise. Instead of reacting or suppressing it, you pause. You acknowledge, something is moving inside me. That pause, small as it seems, weakens the nafs more than force ever could, because the nafs depends on immediacy. It thrives when there is no space between impulse and action. When you create even a moment of stillness, its authority begins to loosen. This does not mean you will always succeed. Some days you will notice too late. Some days reaction will come first. Ibn Arabi reminded seekers that consistency matters more than perfection. The heart learns through repetition. Another common mistake is trying to argue with the nafs. You may feel an urge and immediately begin debating it internally, justifying or negotiating. This often leads nowhere because the nafs is skilled in reasoning. It can out-argue you using your own thoughts. Instead, Ibn Arabi taught witnessing. Witness the urge. Witness the discomfort. Witness the pull without feeding it. You may notice something surprising. When an impulse is not obeyed and not fought, it often fades on its own. What felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What seemed urgent reveals itself as temporary. This is not suppression. This is maturity. The nafs loses power when it is no longer the center of attention. When awareness holds the center, impulses become visitors rather than rulers. In practical life, this might look like staying silent during an argument you would normally escalate, or delaying a response until your body settles, or allowing discomfort without immediately seeking relief. These are not grand spiritual acts. They are quiet victories. And Ibn Arabi taught that God's nearness is found not in dramatic moments, but in these subtle shifts of inner authority. So, if you begin to recognize your nafs more clearly, do not turn against yourself. Do not rush the process. The very fact that you can observe your impulses is a sign that awareness has already taken root. The nafs does not weaken through shame. It weakens through clarity. And once clarity becomes steady, a deeper understanding begins to emerge, one that reveals not only that the nafs exists, but how it moves through different states within you. What if your inner struggle is not static but a journey unfolding stage by stage? The nafs is not fixed in one condition. It shifts, responds, retreats, and advances depending on awareness, intention, and habit. Ibn Arabi emphasized that the inner journey is not a straight line, but a movement, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, often repeating itself until clarity deepens. This is why the Sufis spoke of states of the nafs, not as labels to judge yourself by, but as mirrors, ways of recognizing where consciousness currently stands. The first state is the nafs that commands. This is the nafs most people know well, even if they do not name it. It is impulsive and urgent. It pushes toward immediate satisfaction and reacts before wisdom can intervene. In daily life, this state appears when you say something and instantly regret it, or when you act against your own values simply to relieve discomfort. In this state, the nafs does not pause to consider consequence. It says, now, and when it is obeyed repeatedly, it grows louder, more demanding, more convincing. But even here, Ibn Arabi reminded seekers not to despair. Awareness of this state already means you are not fully inside it. Many people live their entire lives without ever questioning why they act as they do. Then comes a shift, often quiet, sometimes painful. The second state is the self-reproaching Nafs. This is the stage where conscience awakens. After an action, something within you reflects. There is regret, discomfort, a sense that something was not aligned. This can feel heavy, but it is actually a sign of life. In ordinary terms, this is when you replay a moment in your mind and think, I could have done better. It is when excuses no longer fully satisfy you. Ibn Arabi taught that this state is a mercy. Without it, growth cannot begin. The pain you feel is not punishment, it is sensitivity returning to the heart. But this stage carries its own risk. If regret turns into self-hatred, the Nafs simply adopts a new disguise. This is why awareness must remain gentle, even here. As reflection deepens, another transformation begins. The third state is the inspired Nafs. Here, the inner noise begins to soften. You still feel impulses, but you also feel something else, a subtle guidance, a quiet nudge toward what is right. Decisions no longer feel as chaotic. You begin to sense the difference between what feeds the ego and what settles the heart. In daily life, this may appear as choosing silence where you once argued, or restraint where you once rushed. The pleasure of obedience begins to outweigh the thrill of impulse. Ibn Arabi described this state as the heart becoming receptive. Awareness is no longer reactive, it is responsive. And then, by God's mercy, there is a state the Sufis spoke of with great reverence, the tranquil Nafs. This is not emotional numbness, nor is it the absence of struggle. It is inner acceptance. The person no longer fights reality internally. When something unfolds, the heart remains steady. Gratitude and patience become natural responses rather than forced efforts. Such a person is not controlled by circumstances. Praise does not inflate them. Difficulty does not break them. Their satisfaction rests not in outcomes, but in trust. Ibn Arabi reminded seekers that this state is not permanent for most. People move between states, sometimes within the same day. What matters is not where you remain, but where you return. Progress is not measured by never falling. It is measured by how quickly awareness comes back. So, instead of asking, have I mastered my Nafs? A better question emerges. In this moment, who is leading? And if you can answer that honestly, the path forward becomes clearer. Because once the states are recognized, the work shifts from understanding to practice. How then? Did Ibn Arabi teach people to guide the Nafs without suppressing it or letting it rule? Ibn Arabi did not teach people to dominate the Nafs through sheer force of will. He observed that willpower alone is unstable. It weakens with fatigue, emotion, and circumstance. When control depends only on strength, it collapses at the first moment of exhaustion. Instead, he taught something quieter and far more enduring. He taught delay. In ordinary life, the Nafs thrives on immediacy. It pushes you to speak before understanding, to act before reflecting, to escape discomfort before it can be felt fully. Ibn Arabi said that when a servant learns to pause even briefly, the balance of power begins to shift. You feel the urge to respond sharply. You delay your response by a few breaths. You feel pulled toward distraction. You sit with the discomfort for a moment longer. You feel the desire to justify yourself. You allow silence to remain. These pauses may seem insignificant, but spiritually, they are decisive, because in those moments, awareness has space to return. Ibn Arabi emphasized that remembrance does not always mean words. Sometimes, remembrance is simply staying present while the Nafs is uncomfortable. When you do not immediately obey or suppress an impulse, you are practicing restraint without violence. This is why he warned against treating the Nafs as an enemy to be crushed. Suppression creates inner conflict, awareness creates order. Another principle he taught was choosing humility over inner argument. When the nafs is challenged, it often demands explanation. It wants to argue its case. This is justified. This is necessary. You are right to feel this way. Engaging in this debate gives it energy. Instead, Ibn Arabi advised letting the argument pass unanswered, not because the nafs is correct, but because not every impulse deserves attention. When the heart remains grounded, the nafs grows quiet on its own. In daily life, this may look like not explaining yourself when explanation is driven by ego, or accepting being misunderstood without rushing to correct the image others have of you. These moments are uncomfortable, but they loosen the grip of self-importance. He also emphasized consistency over intensity. Small, repeated acts of awareness reshape the inner landscape. One patient response today matters more than dramatic restraint once a month. The nafs learns through pattern, just as habits do. This is why Ibn Arabi linked control of the nafs to daily life rather than retreat. The marketplace, the family, the workplace, these are where the nafs reveals itself most clearly, and where it can be guided most honestly. Even failure, he taught, can be instructive. When you fall back into reaction, the key is not despair, but reflection. What was I avoiding? What was I protecting? Where did awareness leave me? These questions turn mistakes into insight. Over time, something subtle changes. The nafs begins to anticipate restraint. Its urgency softens. Impulses still arise, but they no longer carry the same authority. This is not repression. This is maturity. And when restraint becomes familiar, a transformation takes place that many do not expect. The nafs does not disappear, but it begins to serve rather than command. What does life look like when the nafs is no longer the ruler of your inner world, but a force guided by awareness? There comes a point in the journey where the struggle feels different, not because impulses vanish, but because they no longer dominate the inner space. The nafs still speaks, still desires, still reacts, but its voice is no longer the loudest. Ibn Arabi described this shift as a change in authority. When the nafs rules, life feels urgent. Emotions demand immediate expression. Discomfort feels intolerable. The heart is rarely at rest. But when awareness becomes steady, the same experiences arise without the same inner chaos. You notice this first in ordinary moments. Someone disagrees with you, and the familiar heat rises, but it does not take over. You feel the urge to respond sharply, yet something within remains calm. The reaction passes like a wave that never reaches the shore. You are tested by delay, loss, or uncertainty. Instead of resisting reality internally, you allow it to unfold, not because you approve of difficulty, but because you trust that reacting blindly will not bring clarity. This is what it means for the nafs to become a servant. It still provides energy, motivation, and self-preservation, but it no longer dictates direction. It follows rather than leads. Ibn Arabi used the metaphor of a mount. When the nafs is wild, it throws the rider wherever it pleases. When guided, it carries the rider toward the destination. The strength that once dragged you away from presence becomes the force that supports endurance. In practical life, this looks like emotional steadiness rather than emotional numbness. You still feel joy, disappointment, attraction, and grief, but you are not enslaved by them. Your responses become intentional rather than impulsive. This state does not announce itself. There is no moment of arrival. You simply notice that inner battles happen less often, that silence feels less threatening, that contentment does not depend as heavily on outcomes, that you recover more quickly when you do stumble. Most importantly, You stop negotiating constantly with yourself. The inner arguments quiet down. Decisions feel cleaner. Trust replaces tension. Ibn Arabi taught that this is not achieved by isolating oneself from life, but by remaining present within it. The Nafs becomes disciplined not through retreat, but through repeated acts of awareness in the midst of action. And this is why he warned against seeking spiritual control as a badge of achievement. The moment control becomes an identity, the Nafs reclaims the throne under a new name. True mastery is quiet. It does not seek recognition. It does not announce progress. It expresses itself as steadiness. At this stage, obedience no longer feels forced. Restraint no longer feels like loss. The heart begins to experience a subtle freedom, the freedom of not being driven by every inner demand. This is not perfection. It is alignment. And alignment carries a peace that cannot be manufactured. It emerges naturally when the inner hierarchy is restored, when awareness leads and the Nafs follows. But this journey does not end with personal calm. Its purpose is deeper than emotional balance. It is meant to reorient the heart towards something greater than the self. If the Nafs is no longer your master, what becomes the center of your life instead? Every human life unfolds alongside this silent struggle, not as a dramatic battle, but as a series of small, almost invisible choices. Each moment offers the same question in a different form. Who is leading right now? Most people never ask it. They move from impulse to impulse, reaction to reaction, unaware that something within them is steering the course. Others sense the struggle, but feel overwhelmed by it. Believing control requires constant force. Ibn Arabi offered a gentler truth. The Nafs does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be seen. When awareness becomes steady, the inner world reorganizes itself. What once demanded obedience begins to soften. What once felt urgent loses its grip. Life does not become free of difficulty, but the heart becomes less disturbed by it. This is the real victory. Not dominance over desire, but freedom from being ruled by it. So, the next time you feel pulled to react, to justify, to escape discomfort, pause for a breath. Notice what is moving inside you. That single moment of awareness is already an act of remembrance, already a step toward clarity. And perhaps the question worth carrying with you is this: have you ever noticed how your inner world changes when you stop reacting and start witnessing? If this reflection resonated with you, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing to Voice of Sufism. Turn on the bell so you don't miss future reflections on everyday signs and timeless wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may help someone else recognize their own inner journey, and continue exploring the related videos appearing on screen, where this path of awareness unfolds even further. Until then, remain attentive, remain patient, and allow each moment to return you gently to what is real.